Good morning, EduFolk, and welcome to this week's weekly review. It is Sunday, the 22nd, I believe, of October. Some people are heading into their half terms. Apparently, some people have already had their half terms, and some people are still looking forward to theirs. I am one of those people. This morning, I am joined by Hannah Wilson, John Gibbs, and Brent Poland, and we've got a lot of stuff to get through this morning. We're going to be looking at Gillian Keegan's suggestion of minimum service levels during strike action. We're also going to look at the continued monitoring of not only teachers by the DfE, but TAs and librarians as well. And we're also going to look at the fact that tutoring may have harmed pupil outcomes. This is the national tutoring in the wake of COVID that was put in place, and then things were scrapped and it was all over the place. But we will unpick that a little bit later on. Before we get cracking, though, just a reminder that our current sponsor is our current show rather, is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? And we have a promo code at the moment, so listen carefully to this one. In capital letters, JCTTR2324, and that's all together, no spaces, and that gives you 20% off your order. And if you want to find something to read over your half term, or indeed just for professional development in general, go to johncattbookshop.com and you can explore the full range there. Right, so let's get cracking. So, minimum service levels. These are set to be introduced to schools and colleges during strike action, but it will be a voluntary agreement with trade unions. Government has announced that these measures following 10 days of strike action this year, and this has totaled to 25 million lost days over the course of the strike action recently. The Department for Education said the proposals will put in place protections for children and young people and parents to ensure education can continue during any future strike action. However, this has not been received well by the various unions, including Paul Whiteman, who is General Secretary of the NAHT, and he said that this move is overly hostile and attack on the basic democratic freedoms of school leaders and teachers. And this is at the time where the government should be building bridges with teachers, not doing everything in their effort to continue destroying them. Brent, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on this one first. Go ahead.
This is the last dying breath of a government who's out of touch with reality. They've lost the room. They've lost all credibility whatsoever. If they're coming out with this, they need to negotiate, compromise. They need to learn how to be good politicians. The art of politicians sometimes is to listen, compromise, and understand your real situation that you're in, and live in the reality of where we are, the real politic. And this is completely tone deaf. This is more to do with playing some Thatcher card of attacking unions, and plays out with some right-wing media and the newspapers rather than actually based on fact or evidence. And that this is soundbite politics. It's disgusting, actually, and it's gone down very, very badly, because we need the Education Secretary to go the other way. We need her to understand why there were strikes in the first place. She caused the strikes in the first place. Her government caused the strikes in the first place. And as much as I don't like to think this, cynically speaking, I believe that the strikes possibly were caused on purpose to create some discord, to be able to attack individuals, because the independent review body is what the actual strike action was about. And the government had the independent review body pay award and refused to acknowledge what even it was, thus causing the strikes, and thus then trying to place some sort of far right tin pot regime, draconian laws against unions, because this is where we're at. I mean, unions may not be liked by some individuals, but they offer protection for the workers, and we have the democratic right to strike. The union voted, even with the draconian legislation trying to prevent unions from going on strike, the unions voted. And just before the strike was called off, I may add, the NASUWT, adults, the head teachers unions, were all going to go on strike as well. So she needs to understand that school leaders as well would be wanting to go on strike. The last point I'd make is most schools came to some understanding and compromise. My school remained open. I was on strike along with a lot of my members, but we always kept open, like we kept open during COVID for our most vulnerable children. And that's the way the majority of schools would operate anyway. It's unnecessary. She doesn't need to do this. She doesn't need to do this at all.
So just alluding to that mention of COVID, and the thing that rings in my ears is that 25 million lost days in total. And Hannah, I'm just wondering your thoughts on this, because of course, there are many reasons that teachers are unhappy, teachers are going on strike. But surely, you know, when you hear something like 25 million lost days, we're talking about children's education here. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it was slightly tone deaf in the fact that we're all working incredibly hard, and actually they should have maybe thanked teachers for all their hard work at the start of it, and kind of actually got the tone right to begin with. And I think they're a little bit delusional as to what teachers do. I don't think any of us weren't setting a mark in work and checking in and doing additional hours during COVID. And the same with the strikes. I don't think we were all asked if we were closed, we set work for those students, and the vulnerable students were still allowed to be in school and there was staff to support them. We're not abandoning these children. We all have a duty of care and we are providing education to them. It's more whether they've done that at home and the situation of whether they've been supported to do that. But I think saying that we can't strike is kind of basically because they've done this U-turn on this pay and realise that they've made a budgeting error, and actually they're not going to be providing the schools with the budget to be able to cover the increase in fees. And now they're panicking that we're all going to go on strike again because they've messed up and they're not going to fill that gap. And they just are trying to cover themselves rather than thinking of solutions and working with teachers going forward. Interesting.
And John, coming to you on this one.
Yes, but this is very much, as Brent says and Hannah says, a straw man. It's just it's something that wasn't happening that we're now going to defeat. I think also the phrase minimum service. I think there's important to grasp a sense of irony from this government talking about minimum service, because I'd like to turn to them and say, well, if you provide a minimum service on things like honesty, integrity, water cleanliness, and multiple other things that they have failed in, health and care of the health service, and so on. So minimum service might be a grim reflection of their failure, but it certainly isn't a reflection of anything that teachers. The irony is, another irony, is that teachers spend an awful lot of time during strikes minimizing the effect of their own industrial action. That's always been my experience. So This is purely a straw man. It's thrown up because we're approaching an election and we expect a lot more of these bogeymen in order to try and appeal to a certain kind of voter. It goes back to the idea of teachers being a blob, you know, that they're the enemy. Somehow we just want a day off, maybe down the seaside, if we could. It's all nonsense.
Well, exactly. Well, interesting. And I'm sure this will continue to come up. I highly doubt, like many of these stories, that it will go away anytime soon. But in a moment, we're going to move on to DfE Spygate. So a couple of weeks ago, those of you that were here will remember that we talked about the DfE monitoring a lot of notable people in education, monitoring their social media accounts and keeping files on them. And I know that Ruth Swales was one of those people, and she submitted a subject access request and managed to get hold of all the information that they had on her. Now we're looking at ordinary teaching and support staff being very angry after discovering that there are files on them as well. And they too have submitted subject access requests compelling the DfE to release the information that they hold. And there have yet again been notable people like Dr. and I must get her name right, Dr. Konk-Bayer, an award-winning early childhood author. She's another one who's had a file on her. And she was told by the organisers of a conference, much like what happened to Ruth, that they didn't want her there and that they felt it would be too problematic. And that she'd be responsible for this conference having their funding withdrawn if she spoke. And so this just seems to be more of the same unnecessary intrusion, maybe, of people who are critical of the government and are critical of policies relating to education, to teaching, and to, it seems, the well-being of children more generally. I mean, is this over the top, or is this something that is necessary to keep tabs on people that the government feel, or the Department for Education feel, are overstepping? Hannah, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
I want to know who's doing this and who's funding this. How much money is being spent on spending the time to, if it's going to that point where they're monitoring TAs and librarians, there must be thousands of people. Like, that's a lot of hours and a lot of manpower. Like, how have they got the money to do that, but not the rest? And it seems to be, again, a negative thing that they're using it to block people with their voices, as opposed to highlighting the people that would be useful to get their voice heard. And actually, we need to be, if they were using it for good and being like, right, these are the people we need to get on a panel, we need to have a chat with them, we need to get their ideas of how to improve education, then I could kind of understand it. But it seems to be used for kind of negative purposes and kind of blocking people and things, as opposed to positive purposes, and actually being like, they're not the only people that are feeling like that. It's not like one single person. There are lots of people within education that just want it to improve. We just want the best for the children. We're not saying the things because we don't like education. We're all in it because we love it, but we just want it to be better and improve. And it seems to be a negative thing rather than a tool for good.
Valid point. John, what about you? What are your thoughts on this? Do you reckon the DfE maybe have a file on you?
Well, I hope so. Oh, that would be great. I'd love to find. Oh, that, I feel disappointingly no. Or it would just say something like, no, don't worry. It'd say something like that.
Why?
But no, I when we talk about this, when we talked about the last sort of version of this, I can feel that, and I heard it when Hannah was talking there, that because we are basically rational human beings, the four of us, and teachers generally, we are reaching out to see if you can make sense of this. Maybe it's just a sort of surveying process. Maybe they're just trying to find out what's going on. A public opinion thing. Ask a few civil servants to draw up what are teachers thinking here? That would make a sort of sense, but I don't believe that for a minute. I think there's if I were to wax philosophical about this, I'd say that governments of all description tend to go through an arc where at the beginning they are kind of open and welcoming to criticism. And they're confident in their bold ideas. And we are in the muddy, viscous end of that arc right now with this government. And I wouldn't be at all surprised that all sorts of paranoia is lurking the corridors of Whitehall. And so I wouldn't be at all. Again, I'm inclined to believe in the stupidity of this government rather than its rationality. Well, yeah, there are files out there. They're worried about what's being said about them. They see the teaching profession. They're surrounded by critics and enemies. That's what happens to governments that have been in power and they've gone terrifically stale, and they've been in power too long. So it's another indication, as I think these stories today indicate, something about a failing, decaying Pong that is surrounding this government. It's time it went.
As a primary teacher, I have to say I'm enjoying the descriptive language. I've been trying to get words like this out of my year fours all week, and Mr. John Gibbs is. I think I'm going to get you zoom you into my English lessons to boost some the vocabulary choices, because the sort of the viscous end of that sort of. I have this kind of delightful sort of muddy image in my head, and then the Pong at the end is beautiful. I think
the word
Go on.
Yeah, you can't use the word Pong too often. I feel it's an underused word.
Fantastic. Brent, how thick do you reckon the file on you is?
Oh, I'm about to find out, because I've actually issued a subject request.
Do you know? I thought it would.
And I tell you this. I'll tell you this live. As a person of a political party, as a person who's a union rep, I will pretty much destroy whoever is taking these down, because I come from society. I got away from this type of police state during the Troubles, where we were heavily monitored, heavily regulated. I have no faith whatsoever in the establishment or the state, because I have been a victim most of my life of it. So I fully expect there will be a file on me. And I have absolutely no problem standing up for civil liberties. My parents were civil liberties marchers, and we got the rough end of it. So no, John, love you to bits, but I think, cynically speaking, it's fascism. This is getting close to fascism, because they go after academics first in fascism. They go after people who could opposition them, people who have got logic and intelligence. That's the first groups of people that you shut down, is debate. And when you are shutting down debate, that is undemocratic. And it's the second time in 2 conversations that I'm saying the word undemocratic. Union laws, put the 2 together, trying to stop union laws, trying to silence critics. It's very dangerous, slippery slope. And no, I think when you're getting into librarians and TAs, as Hannah said, you're not getting into highly profile people. You're drilling down into the lower levels. And this is an organization, what's its mandate? What is its mandate? How far can we as citizens go to protect our rights? And there's such an irony in this, isn't there? Because we as teachers are tasked with GPDR and all that kind of stuff of protecting data. And here's these people harvesting data on this. For what purpose is this data to be harvested? To cancel us, to shadow ban us? This has got me really activated, because my spidey senses tingle when I have a government that monitors its people, and especially when it monitors its academics, and especially when it monitors people who, let's be honest with you, the intelligentsia. Teachers are members of the intelligentsia. And if you're going to try and silence critics, now there's a difference between the prevent strategy if they are monitoring people who have, sympathies towards terrorist organizations. Absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. We need to ensure that there is some security there, but you do not go beyond your remit and your mandate. And I think this is way beyond their remit and their mandate. I think this is a massive scandal. And as I say, I'm looking forward to reading the documentation of myself. But it better be just monitoring my tweets and saying, oh, well, this guy's, a trade unionist, because if there's anything else in that, I'll blow it open. I have no problem blowing it open, and they can come after me all they want. But what are they going to do? What are they going to do that was never done to me as a child? To be perfectly honest with you, so bring it on.
I think that this is another thing that we're going to have to stay tuned with, particularly with you, Brent. And I'm sure that you will not sit there quietly when you get this information.
On my rights, there's nothing more sacred to me than my human rights, or the human rights of others. And I think that is this, for me, this story is something very, 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 very sinister. And I take it personally if the government's keeping tabs on me. I value my freedom, and I value my freedom to be a critic of the government, which I think is fair and democratic. And I think it's part of what we're doing here in Teachers Talk Radio. Wouldn't like to think that they're monitoring and watching us right now. I mean, not being Orwellian about it, but that is shocking that they are doing this. Absolutely shocking.
Well, good morning to the DFE if they are watching. Yes, John.
I'll just add, yeah, absolutely. I think Brent's right there. You've got to add a sobering reality to this, that there is, especially when you look at things that happened in Northern Ireland and you think that things are happening around the world. Governments are surprisingly venal. And that we tend to live in a cozy sort of idea of this government, governments generally in this country. We take our democracy and our freedom for granted and imagine that governments do the same, and they don't. I remember years ago, I'll share this with you, Brent, a friend of mine, this is back, they were a student in the 60s, and they went to join a civil rights march in Northern Ireland. And they said, they went over there, they said, well, we're going to go over there, I'm going to sit down in the street. And they said, well, they were students at a London university. They sat down on the streets of, I think it was Belfast or Londonderry or Derry, and they sat down there. Sorry about that, Derry. And they sat down in the street, and they met the B Specials, who beat the crap out of them, to pardon, on a Sunday morning. But they realized, and they tried the old thing you do with the police, like, excuse me, officer, I won't have this. Can you give me your number? And that was when they lost consciousness with a baton between the eyes. So there's a different world that you've experienced, Brent. I appreciate that.
Very much. But we got a world where people like myself are equal, and we have laws. And again, when you think we had to fight very hard for that, and those civil liberties, I worry about the surveillance culture coming in. What you see, what's happening in China with the social credit system, the surveillance culture. And I do worry that power without accountability is a danger. And if you're trying to silence people, then you're cutting down on that accountability. And I think it's good to be criticized. It's good to have people hold you to account. We as teachers are always happy to be criticized and happy to be held account. But it's ironic that the very government who's telling us that they want an organization like Ofsted to be sent in to be able to criticize us, well, they don't like it when they're criticized. It's just rank hypocrisy, if you ask me. And it just summarizes for me exactly where I think democracy in this country is going very wrong when they're starting to monitor their academics and shut them down. That is a very dangerous red flag for me. Very dangerous red flag.
Well, I mean, I think we could talk about this story all day, and it's definitely one we're going to keep a very close eye on, and I'm sure will come up again, not only in Weekly Review, but in shows in Education Tonight as well, that this is going to be an ongoing situation. But in a moment, we're going to move on to looking at how tutoring may have harmed pupil outcomes. So this story is going to be looking at how some tutoring under the government's flagship catch-up program, so this is in the wake of COVID, may have actually harmed pupil outcomes, while tuition commissioned by schools has only actually seen a small boost for pupils overall. The independent study focused on the 2021-22 academic year of the National Tutoring Programme when it was run by Randstad, the HR firm, and that was later axed against amongst widespread criticism. The National Foundation for Education Research report found school-led tutoring was associated with improvements in maths at key stages 2 and 4. Equivalent to roughly 1 month's progress. But overall, just not particularly effective. And I know, John, you wanted to talk about this. DFE figures also show that for the students it was most needed for, the take-up wasn't that high. So overall, a bit of a flop, really.
Yeah, there's a surprise with a government initiative. And of course, this was the funding. This was where the Tsar, or who was originally overseeing this, resigned because they gave him nowhere near the amount of money he asked for. He said, yes, we can do a tutoring program. And the reason for that is, a few months ago, last year sometime, I had a guest called Lee Elliott Major, and he's a professor he's a professor of something or other. Anyway, he's a professor of social mobility. Yes, Axel, he's a professor of social mobility. And he's written a very good book, actually, published by John Catt, on equality in education and so on. Anyway, he said, all the research shows that tutoring works. And you've known that for hundreds and hundreds of years. A very simple form of education, one-to-one talking, tutoring works. But the research also shows that you have to do it properly. It definitely works. Tutoring is a great idea. And they tried this in the United States. Huge amount of money flooded out under the No Child Left Behind Act. And it was seen to have largely failed. And it largely failed because there was very low take-up among the people it was actually aimed at. That it was seen by the school as a bolt-on. It was seen by the students often as a punishment. So they were identified as failing students. So you do this instead. So you got to do this. And it's going to be a Saturday morning, or it's going to be in your own time, or you're going to go out, you're going to be called out of class and so on. So when they looked back at this, they realized schools have to be in charge of it. It has to be integrated into the curriculum. It has to make sense to the students, and they have to buy into it themselves. And when you do those things, tutoring really does work. So this study that says, did more harm than good, I can believe that. I can believe that this particular program was little more than a sticking plaster, a publicity exercise, an attempt to say we are going. They funded it not enough. They hired outside companies like Randstad who did it badly. So it was a failed project. But the general idea of tutoring is good and does work, and it can work very well to transform to help and assist and so on. It's a very old form of education, and it works, really.
Oh, cool. Hannah?
My school did it a little bit differently. We opted not to have the tutoring and rather pay the teachers. So they did it that we could either do after schools, we could use it to pay for cover over tutor time and have lunch times because our tutor time's in the middle of the day, or Easter intervention sessions. And actually it was far better because the students were getting that kind of close, kind of small group tutoring from teachers that actually knew exactly what they needed to know. And it's like you said, it can work if it's correct. And actually it really supported the students. It was really positive, exciting thing for them to do. Mainly because I bought sweets, but it wasn't seen as a negative thing. I will bribe them. On my Easter day, I allowed them to run to McDonald's and back for lunch. So they were all super excited to be in. So I think it's one of those, but when they're pulled out of lessons, like you said, and it's done by somebody that doesn't know what the teachers are teaching and what they've done and how they've been taught as well, it can muddy the water and actually make their learning more difficult. So it's whether it's done correctly is really important.
Mm-hmm. And coming to you, Brent, on this one finally.
Yeah, echo completely what Hannah's just said and John, but certainly we did it the same way as what Hannah suggested. My Easter and June half term was pizza, so the kids got a nice Domino's, and time was paid to teachers to stay behind after school and target specific students who they had a relationship with. And so, for instance, on results day, one of the happiest moments in my results day was one of the students that I directly tutored. His parents and he were there as they opened the results. And straight away came over to me and says, thank you, because these results were down to, what you were doing. The thing is, I would have done it anyway. I was doing it anyway. So it was just giving a financial boost to some teachers, basically, who wanted to tutor. But it worked, in the main, it worked with our school, but we're a smaller school and we know our kids quite well. But the uptake was shaky sometimes because you're trying to ask kids to come in after school. So you needed that intrinsic motivation. But it was cobbled together, and our person in charge of it was sometimes going, I just need people to stay behind for these couple of kids. And you could see where those that were voluntarily, the teachers who were voluntarily able to do it, and those that weren't. So it wasn't completely well organized in the sense that it was, embedded. But when it worked, but it was like everything else the government's doing. It was patchy and it wasn't thought through. And obviously, what happens next year? Because I still think there are children who need tutoring now. I think there are children in the current generation. They almost just went, right, COVID's done. We're moving on. We're back to normal. Same as the exam results. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of kids out there that need private one-to-one. And the funny thing is the marketization of education. A lot of parents with cultural capital and finances are having their children privately tutored at an absolute cost. And I think that's unfortunately part of what's actually happening as well, when you've got teachers there who could probably tutor their children if they start to make it worth a while. And if equally, most importantly, the kids that I tutored wanted to be there. It's nothing worse when you've got people sitting in front of you who don't want to be there and you go, why am I doing this? So it's got to be mutually beneficial for both, and equally buy-in has to be there and a system has to be there. But the government have to, I think, start doing this, start individual one-to-one tutoring, because John is absolutely bang on. There's nothing more effective than sitting down with one-to-one and coaching a child and building that connection with them and helping them, not just with their subject, but helping them with revision and study, having a conversation, having a cup of tea with them, going, how are you? Talk to me, tell me how you're feeling. And I think that is the most effective way of teaching sometimes. If we had smaller classes, we'd be able to do more of that, let's be honest with you, rather than the industrial size teaching that we have. So the concept is right. The execution and the funding and the way it was organized is not.
And again, I think there is more to be said on that. But no, talking about cultural capital is interesting because I work in an international school. And of course, there are parents who will absolutely, because they will throw money at tutoring and will pay pretty much what you ask them to for that privilege, because it is a privilege. It is it is additional teacher time and all the rest of it, but because they are able to. And often I go backwards and forwards in my head, because there are colleagues of mine who won't tutor on principle because they're like, no, we're in a fee-paying school. There is no need for me to be making money on top of this. But then there are the kind of the me's of it who sort of like, okay, well, it's nice pocket money, and yes, I've got tutees that I've had for a number of years, and the sort of, I suppose, in the environment I'm in, the guilt isn't there as much for me. Whereas if I was in a UK state school, excuse me, I think I would feel a little bit differently about it, because it's not the same environment, and the children that should be having those sessions and need to have those sessions are not accessing them because they can't. That seems ridiculously unfair. But no, again, another one that I think we need to keep an eye on, and I'm sure there'll be more comments on that, particularly in these years post. I say post COVID, but we're still in it, because I keep seeing a lot of positive tests, unfortunately, popping up all over Twitter, or X as we now know it as. I still can't get my head around that. But no, it's been incredibly interesting. So in a moment, I'm going to pick your brains about your favorite shows from this week. So as always on Teachers Talk Radio, we have had a number of, well, I think all the shows are great, but we've had So, I mean, we always cover so many weird and wonderful, brilliant things, but and we always kind of chat amongst ourselves and find it difficult to pick our favourites. But who am I going to nominate first? I'm going to pick on Brent first.
Yeah, everybody picks on Brent. I'm going to nominate Hannah's. I thought it was really interesting. It was Monday Twilight Show. Really good topic. Sometimes the topic itself sells the pod beam which you can obviously listen back to. But I've always been fascinated by this idea of high achieving pupils. And what do we categorize as high achieving pupils? Going back to the whole gifted and talented day, what was gifted and talented back in those days? But how do we motivate them? How do they change throughout? So really good discussion, really good in-depth sort of analysis of what is this idea of high achieving pupils and how do they maintain that over time? So that was Hannah's Twilight on Monday, wasn't it, Hannah? I think it was Monday night. Was it? Yeah. So well worth a listen back to that one.
Fabulous. Okay, John, coming to you next.
I'm going to go for the Sunday Late Show on the 15th of October with Amanda. And it was about the decline in take-up of GCSE music. And what was so interesting about this was that there was they were talking to a guest called Nikki Mark, and they gave first-hand account of the decline in take-up of music, but also the general devaluing of music in schools. And of course, again, it's not devaluing of music in all schools. Lots of schools are doing wonderful things and providing all sorts of rich musical experiences for their students. But it'll be the schools in the certain areas. You could draw a postcode and find out where music is vanishing from this country. Again, politicians and people will generally say, oh, Britain, we're so good at music. Music's one of our strengths. We really love music. And we all want our own kids to have access to music if possible, even if piano lessons are a bit painful. But nonetheless, we want them to have access to it. So we're all in favour of this thing, and yet it's continually impoverished. And it's very important to making the school a rich, enjoyable experience beyond simply learning maths and English and so on, which all themselves are very important. But music creates that sense in which it's worth getting up in the morning and going to school for many kids. And it's disappeared. It's been under attack for years, unfortunately.
Sadly so, but a very important show to listen back to if you have the chance. Hannah,
Yes.
over to you.
I'm picking Anna's show because I'm an art teacher and this is one of my favourite topics, is getting creative. How do we inject creativity into a crowded curriculum? And I just think creativity is one of those that is not thought of as an important skill, but actually it's being creative and problem solving is one of the most important skills that a student can learn. And I think we need to we know that students learn through their different schema, and actually being able to be creative and problem solve and think about the different ways that we learn and interject different things is an important skill. So I think kind of getting creativity across everywhere and not thinking that it's just in those kind of non-core subjects and it's not important is wrong, and that we need to order it.
Brilliant. And
Absolutely.
my show of the week was Mr. Tom Hopkins Burke's show about careers. And the whole show did a kind of up, down and background about careers and careers advice, careers education and careers guidance, the crucial difference between the two, and the fact that actually this needs to be seen, or careers advisors, careers teachers need to be seen as properly paid up members of staff who have a very important job and who need to have a greater understanding that the world of work is changing again, particularly in the wake of COVID, and how we need to look again at maybe what we're teaching children about and what we're advising them to do and how work experience looks and things like that. And it's well worth a listen back to. So yeah, that was my show of the week. So lots we have covered this week. Just a quick reminder that before I send you all off into the rest of your Sunday, that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational. It is publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And you need to go and check out their latest releases, which are all available at johncattbookshop.com. And if you would like a lovely 20% discount code, you can use JCTTR2324. It's a mouthful to say that, but it's all together, and it is actually at the bottom of your screen there.
Down there, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it in the little banner at the bottom there. So please make sure you use that correctly so you do get your discount. And there's all sorts there for you to have a look at. So happy reading. That is all from us this week. I want to say thank you to all my guests today, to Hannah, to John, and to Brent. And we will see you again next week.